Hey, welcome to BizTechTalk. This week's episode, we're going to be talking about internal knowledge management. And with me is Kit Letcher. Hi, Kit. How are you doing?
Hi there. Good afternoon here in sunny Oklahoma. Nice to be with you, Dan.
Good to see you. Kit is CEO of BBB for Central Oklahoma. And I'm Dan Stewart, and I'm owner of Personify Solutions, a consulting company here in Oklahoma, but we serve most of the country. Kit, you want to do a little intro on BBB?
Sure. BBB is a nonprofit organization. We cover North America. Our BBB covers about 70% of Oklahoma. But what's awesome about our organization is our focus is really on making business better. What are the tools, things that we can do for business owners, high-level decision makers, people who are just getting started in business or have been in business for 50 plus years? And how do we give them the tools and just resources that they need to grow their business, maintain their business, and face upcoming challenges in whatever capacity that looks like, and really be a partner to them in whatever they're facing. So we're excited to be a part of the BizTechTalk and just, think outside the box on things that are business facing, if you will, and just things that are new that sometimes we don't ever give enough time to, like our topic today. I think this is a good one because we have all experienced staff turnover and that churn where that person resigns or they are terminated for whatever reason. And then after the fact, you think, oh, what just happened? They knew how to do XYZ job. Who else knows how to do that? Or who else knows like how to get that process? Or who else has the relationship with that customer? And now we've got to figure this out after the fact instead of, having a little bit of a plan on the front end. So I'm excited to have this discussion today and share some insights and things that we think will be helpful, and also get your intake on that, Dan, from just really the strategy and the technical end of it.
Yeah. So I was just reading Wall Street Journal that they call it the Great Resignation, and it's the largest exit by employees on their own volition in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
So the article stated that employees are quitting when they don't even have another job lined up. They're just leaving their current positions in mass numbers to explore new opportunities. And what is happening is that all this knowledge is walking out the door en masse pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And companies are really struggling to figure out ways to manage that.
Yeah. And I think our topic today of just that knowledge management, one, I think it really helps with retention of employees so they understand the value that they bring to the organization,
That's a good point.
but also helping them understand that there's always an opportunity to learn. And I think goes back to, and we talk about this often, but the culture of your organization. What are you doing to not only reinforce the talent that you have, but make sure that they have opportunities for growth and to maybe move into new areas where they can explore their skills and develop them further. That enhances, the productivity and what they do for the organization, but then personally. And I think we've seen that this last year is we have to look at the entire person. It's not just a job or a widget or a process. Like it's this whole person comes to work. And if you don't, really reinforce both sides of that, who they are externally and internally, you're not going to be able to retain them. And so I think people are now seeing that. So I'm excited to dig into this and just help our businesses figure out, like, how do we do this better?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that companies are really realizing that there's a good part of their asset that's hard to measure, and that is the knowledge and information asset that their employees hold. So as a technologist, knowledge management comes up quite a bit, but I think it's often misunderstood. From a technology perspective, people think of knowledge management as a knowledge base, a database, and they're going to put articles and artifacts into that database that people can search on to be able to answer customer questions or just learn about some aspect of how the company operates. But that's such a small part of that knowledge asset that most of it goes unnoticed. So I want to take a bit of time here to just kind of lay some foundation for what knowledge management really is. And so you have two pieces of knowledge that are common. One is explicit knowledge, and that is stuff that's, for lack of a better term, written down. It's documented. You can store it in a database, or it's already in a system. It's in your CRM, and you can search on it, you can read about it, or understand how that process works. But that only makes up about 20% of the total knowledge in the organization. About 80% is what they call tacit. And that's sort of like experience, an employee that's been with you a few years and just understands a certain customer and how to talk to them. Well, how do you capture that? And that is really the most valuable asset of any kind of set of knowledge, right? That kind of understanding. The person that's called in to solve some sort of issue, just because they've been around, they just get it. They understand the organization, they understand the industry, and trying to capture that is really hard to do, and really goes unnoticed. I don't think people have really sat down and identified what tacit knowledge do we have that we're missing that's going to end up walking out the door. A couple of researchers a number of years ago put together what's called the knowledge spiral. And you can look this up. There's graphics on it on Google, pretty easy to find. But what it talks about is how that knowledge is transferred around. So when it's tacit, it's usually a dialogue. It's a person sitting with someone while they're on the phone and kind of experiencing their experience of working with the customer and learning from that kind of dialogue, interaction, real time, experiential learning going on. Then you have tacit to explicit, where you can take that information and actually put it into a system, right? So someone can look at and read about it later. Then you have explicit to explicit, which kind of all within systems, going from one to another and looking it up in one system. And that's pretty easy. That part's pretty straightforward. And then the interesting thing is that explicit turns back into tacit, where someone takes that, reads that article, and then expands it, puts it into new situations, right? Thinks outside the box on how to apply that knowledge. And you got to go through the whole cycle again of trying to capture that tacit knowledge. So if that person does walk out the door, somehow you've captured that. Now, that's, I know, very esoteric. Now we try to talk real world business, right? And all this stuff. So Kit, tell us about the business side of what you just heard and what you guys are dealing with the BBB, not only with businesses you've talked to, but also BBB itself, your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that our BBB does is we call businesses about becoming accredited. And that for us is like our sales cycle. So it's like the way most people bring on a new customer or a vendor that they want to work with. And we have individuals who make those phone calls. They very rarely do face-to-face meetings. So it's primarily through phone call. And I have a team of approximately 5 people who do that right now. And this is the area where we experience the most turnover. Sales is one of the hardest positions in our office. And I think what I've seen is it's one of the hardest positions for most businesses. Yep. I'm really fortunate in that my most tenured person has been with me for almost 5 years. And then the next most tenured person is 3 years. And then we have the other 3 have been with us for a year or less. And so we've obviously experienced some turnover in the last year, but we really rely on that history and that knowledge. So we have the written procedures and how to actually do the job. How do you go through the process of doing the phone call, entering the application? We have a script that they follow. And so that's the very tactical kind of things that I can put in front of people, but that doesn't tell them necessarily like how to talk to a business owner or.
And I would put that in the explicit knowledge category.
Right, exactly.
That SOP.
Yeah. And so they've got that and they can read it and they can do it, but like what moves them from just performing that function to then being successful? And that's really where they're sitting side by side and they're listening during their first week of training to that experienced salesperson making the phone calls and getting hung up on, and how do they, interact with that level of rejection, or getting somebody and they're surprised and like, oh, I've been calling you. I'm so glad to finally talk to you. Here's the things that we wanted to talk about. And being able to what looks like maybe improv just a little bit but it's really not. Like, it's then part of their muscle memory because they've done it so many times, but now they're showing somebody else how to handle that situation and how to deal with, just things that come up on the fly, and being able to say, you know what, I don't have that information right now, but I will look it up for you. And here's when I will get back to you with that information. And so reinforcing we don't have all the answers, but we are accountable. So we will definitely get that back to you. And so it teaches our core values along the way, which I love.
Mm.
And so they get that side by side when they do the training. But what's great about it is then after that person is fully trained, that new salesperson is on board, we're all accountable to each other. So when we're talking to businesses and somebody hears something that sounds a little bit strange, or maybe it didn't match the training on both sides of that fence, they can say, hey, I heard you say this. I'm curious, why did you phrase it that way? Or I really think if you would phrase it this way, you'd be more successful. Or that's counterproductive to like what our mission and what our core values are. And so they kind of call each other out, not in a negative way, but in a holding each other accountable way. And so that really reinforces that, experiential kind of training that we can't necessarily write down, like unless they're having that conversation and the dialogue in front of everybody. It's not behind closed doors. It is part of the group. That's part of our team environment. And that's how everybody learns it, and it reinforces it on a regular basis. So if my person who leaves after that's been with me for 5 years, the people who've only been with me for 6 months and 1 year, they've had the same kind of training and reinforcement all along the way. And so I know that they will continue to grow in that position in that same way. And that's the expectation, that they will then train and be a part of the group the same way that 5-year and that 3-year person is. And so they're all working together. And I think that really goes also back into continuous education and understanding that we're all constantly learning. We always have things to work on, but we have to do that for each other. And I think that really builds in that accountability and just repetition of here's how you talk to people. Here's the BBB way of doing things. Here's what we don't do.
Yeah.
So it's never learned incorrectly. It's like, oh, wait, stop doing it that way. We don't do that. Now let's reinforce the positive.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you can convert that into explicit knowledge by, maybe video, taking video of where they're together on a call, and even the Q&A between those two people where the learner is asking questions, and you could capture that in video and then store it somewhere so people could look at it and learn from it. So that's just an example, converting that into explicit. But I think too, what's interesting, what you're talking about is creating that learning organization. So if you actually label it that, hey, we want to become a learning organization, where that's just built into our culture, which I thought was great when you mentioned that. So if it's part of the culture, then people know that's something that they just do. They hand down their knowledge or hand over their knowledge to somebody else. And there's a way to do that through SOPs, through that, just sitting together and running through some scenarios. It's just part of their work, and they're measured on that even, and how well they do that, and how often they do that. So you can really intertwine this with just how you put your company forward, just how you want the culture of your company to operate, and just make it part of everyday life.
And something else that I think oftentimes, when we start talking about things like performance standards and accountability and like performance reviews, we tie that to goals and like sales metrics, or did you meet your number? Are you always moving forward? But what we don't always see businesses do is like, have you updated your standard operating procedures? That should be part of your performance evaluation for your employees. Did you train somebody else, like do cross training on your position? So when you go on vacation, or if you win the lottery, somebody else is able to fill in for you, and we don't miss a beat as an organization. Because while, we're happy for that person to go on vacation, or if they have this really great thing in their life, everything else needs to continue moving forward. It also opens up some opportunities for people to grow. Like, as far as like, oh, I never thought I would like doing this kind of job or this kind of skill. And now it's opened my eyes to what it could be versus what I thought it was going to be. And you've been able to promote or elevate somebody within your organization, which is even more ideal.
Yeah, and you talked about retention earlier.
Mhm.
People want to feel that they're important in what their role is in the organization. And by doing that, either as a learner or as a teacher, they feel, hey, they're what I do is important to the organization. They want me to learn or they want me to transfer the knowledge that I have. So I think both serve as a benefit
Yeah.
to making people feel they belong to the company. They're part of the growth of the organization.
Mhm.
And so I think that setting that up just makes people feel more valuable, which is really important right now to keep people happy and keep them in your confines,
Yeah.
right? So I think that you can really expand this out, like you said, in several ways to just really make it part of the routine of
Mhm.
working, at your organization. I try to, from a technology standpoint, I'm always backing people off of tools first because a lot of times, in fact, I'm working with a client right now who wants to run out and buy a knowledge base, right? And for it's a little easier if you have a call center help desk because you probably already have a tool for tracking problems and tickets that
Mhm.
probably has a knowledge base included in it where you can add stuff. But that's not the place to start. Place to start is what you're talking about, right? It's on the people side. It's on the SOP and the knowledge sharing. But you can identify where you can capture that and find a place for it, whether it's a shared folder, even, whatever. Just make sure you're capturing it and putting it somewhere as best you can. And like I say, you can't capture every conversation, you can't
Right.
document every single thing that happens, but you can identify those areas and put it somewhere until you figure out, what you want from a technology side, what tools you need. But you'll be in a better place to make that decision,
Yeah.
right? If you do all these other things first.
And I'm curious, Dan, what different like formats or technologies or ways to capture have you seen people use that in years past? Like I know we use a couple different methodologies for it, but what have you seen businesses use or different companies utilize that would be relevant or helpful for people to realize like, oh, that's simple. Like I could totally do that today.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think of tools that companies might already have. So I'll use a couple examples, but categorically, a lot of companies have these. You may not have the specific product, but I think they all have them. So let's talk about Zendesk. So Zendesk is a ticket tracking system where a customer calls in with a problem, or maybe it's internal help desk, in IT, where people call in and they have a problem and they open a ticket and the ticket gets assigned for resolution and there's follow-up and closure to the ticket. Many of these have knowledge-based components. And the idea on the help desk or call center idea is that a new agent can come in and search for, search of tickets and find out, hey, here's the similar ticket of a problem I'm working on. Here's how it's resolved. They
Mhm.
can use that information. Well, that's why all these companies like Zendesk added in a knowledge base. So they can move these into a database of all this knowledge of how to solve a problem,
Right. Kind of
right?
like a
All up
commonly asked questions, if you will.
yeah, you type in specific issue, and here's a set of articles on how that was addressed, in the company. So it makes sense why these companies added on knowledge base. But if let's say you have an internal ticket system just for handling IT problems, you can expand that out. Uh,
Mhm.
you don't have to keep the knowledge base part just internal to IT. You can use it for customer facing stuff or just knowledge you want to capture in a department, right? You don't have to keep it just within that framework. You can use it for all sorts of things. So that's one. Another one is the CRM tool. So
Mhm.
let's say you Salesforce. In Salesforce, you can capture processes, you can capture information around a sales life cycle, but you can also capture articles. You can also capture video, right? And you can put that in there and track it along with the business process, right? With the sales process. So people are like, I'm dealing with this kind of customer. Hey, here's a quick video on how to approach this type of customer in our organization. So you can embed that It's not true knowledge base, but it can function the same way, and just
Right.
using a tool you already have to just at least start capturing this information in some sort of way. So I look at the tools I have and figure
Mhm.
out a way, hey, is there a way I can capture some of this information and put it in there so everybody can get to it and start using it?
Yeah. And I would say my biggest suggestion for people who perhaps don't have standard operating procedures or SOPs right now is to begin with a really basic methodology of capturing that information, because it can feel overwhelming. Like, how am I going to get all of this right now? It's like you don't get all of it right now. You get the
Yeah.
one process that you do the most, and you start with just writing it down and what that looks like from start to finish.
Yep.
And then, fine tuning it and honing it. And what's interesting about it is, when I was going to say it was like 2014, when we started putting in place SOPs and looking at our processes and procedures whenever we first started this and what they looked like versus now, it's completely different. But we had to try a couple of different ways to do it to figure out what really works and what people can follow. And one of the biggest, I would say, tricks, if you will, that where we have found success is giving that SOP to somebody who's completely outside of that department. They have no knowledge of how to do that function as part of their daily operations or procedures. And so they're going in blind. And
Mhm.
can they follow that procedure for like line by line? And if they can't, then that shows you where your gaps are and where you're missing things, or if you have to explain things to them as they're doing it, then perhaps it's not as clear as you thought it was. Because sometimes we can be too close to the thing that we're working on and just too familiar with it. And so this gives you a chance to step back from it and see, like, am I really like getting all of the information captured that's necessary to be successful at this particular process or procedure? And I've even had, like, my husband is a pilot, so man
He's
loves a
used to
checklist.
that.
Yeah. So he loves a checklist. And so
Yeah.
if I really need a true like outside perspective on things, I'll give him a process or a checklist and things that we're working on. And if he can do it, I know it works because
Oh,
he
that's a
has
great idea.
no inner workings of BBB.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, testing is really important. So what we do when we're dealing with the client is that we'll first look for what the greatest risks are,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it's knowledge walking out the door or just a critical process that's vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Either because of the people working on it might leave, or the process itself has issues or is really complicated. And sometimes that leads to sort of re-engineering to a better process.
Right.
But that's why it's got to be iterative, right? If you're always
Mm-hmm.
fine-tuning your processes, then you always have to be fine-tuning your operating procedures around that. So we identify the risks and then go in and determine what needs to be captured. And like you said, having a way to capture is really important. But
Mm-hmm.
you can start out with building a form in Word and putting it in Teams or SharePoint. So it doesn't have to be anything necessarily that pretty. But I
Yeah.
think identifying those risk areas and testing out what you've compiled is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a process for that you can put together to make sure you're capturing it in the right way and it's usable and people are getting to it. And another good thing to do is, after the fact, make sure that people know how to access it and when to access it, and that they are accessing it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can work back around when someone comes in and said, oh, I have this problem, customer, and I couldn't figure out how to solve it. Well, did you look to see if that's part of the SOP? Did you look and see if there's a document captured on this? Did you do some research to learn next time or before you called the customer? And so to make sure that actually adopting that and actually using it in their day-to-day
Mm-hmm.
life is really, really important, because you can build a great database, right? Organize it really well, write all the SOPs. If no one uses them, I'm not getting
You're up a
anywhere.
creek. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I think for today, with everything that we've talked about, I mean, I love having this conversation because with the turnover that's happening at businesses and what they're experiencing currently, I think this can be such a great tool for retention, truly, and helping people understand, when you have employees who are looking at other options, like, what are the things that would potentially make them want to stay and make them feel like they're part of a team and really value that knowledge and that you want to keep it in house. Because while, a paycheck is part of it, there's so much more that goes into it. And I think this is a good starting place for conversations and just
Yeah.
talking to your team and saying, hey, like, here's what I'm thinking, and here's what I want to do going forward. How do you all think we should address this? Since you are facing the customer every day, or you're dealing with the vendor every day, or you're making that phone call, what do you think is the best way in which we address this, and really pull them into it, because
Yep.
they already do the heavy lifting. And so I think
Yep.
we have to honor that and just realize that they probably have really good answers. And that in itself is going to help you with your retention.
Yeah, and they got to see the value
Mhm.
to them and to the organization in doing it. And then you have to add on to that what you said, in that, okay, what if they do leave?
Mhm.
After all is said and done, what if that knowledge does walk out the door? Are you prepared for that?
Right.
So yeah, to wrap up, let's talk about some takeaways. We always try to have some concrete takeaways at the end of the conversation. So Kit, what's top of mind for you for a takeaway?
For me, it's starting with that SOP. Start compiling your list of standard operating procedures, put them in a common place where people can find them, and help them understand that gathering that information is not about like restricting information. It's about opening up the window, if you will, to information, and providing every single person in your organization more information, and just really being part of that team environment. But those SOPs are first and foremost for me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think for me, the first thing would be to identify your high risk areas
Mhm.
where there's a large intellectual asset that's at risk. And I would identify those first, because those are the ones that impact your business the most. And then, secondly, I do the low hanging fruit. Where is the explicit knowledge that you could at least capture pretty easily and put somewhere? Before you get into the tougher side of it. So I would look for areas where you could there's already documentation. You can do some quick documentation, get that stored somewhere, at least to get a start on it.
Yeah.
So that's where I would, if I just want low hanging fruit and way to, take that first step, that's what I would do.
Yeah. And my final one would be really reinforcing that continuous education
Yeah.
and continuous learning model. And, I think as business owners, if this is not something that's currently part of your business, you have to be sensitive in how you introduce it, so that people aren't afraid. Oh my gosh, they're wanting me to train them on how to do my job because I'm out. Like, and I'm going to lose my job, or they're going to hire somebody to replace me. So you have to be really cognizant of how that is being presented, so that it's, the idea is that we're all getting better, because we want to see our organization grow in capacity, in skill building, in professional development, and personal development. We're looking at you as a whole person. And so it's across the board. It's not just in one area.
Yeah.
And this can be really done super, super simple. For instance, like at our monthly staff meeting, we go over something new every single time. And so, like this last time, it was a new widget that had been installed on our CRM that I had just learned about. I was really excited about. And so I pulled up my laptop, but we can screen share it onto our video screen in the room. And I said, hey, I don't know if you guys know about this. This is a new widget that we have. I want to show you how it works really quickly. And then this is how you can use it in your positions. And it works across the board. Like every single person in our organization can use it, but for different reasons, but it is applicable. And so it gave them a new skill that they're familiar with. It gave them something to talk to customers about. And it reinforced like things that helped them continue to learn. So it doesn't have to be huge or scary. It is meant to reinforce that culture of wanting to do better.
Mhm. Yeah, that's great. And I think that's a great final takeaway, because that's one we both strongly agree
Mhm.
on, that creating that learning organization and where people see that value. So just I have a definition pulled up here on a learning organization, and maybe we can close out just on that, because I think that's a good bottom line, very, very important. And that's a learning organization creates, acquires, transfers, and retains knowledge. It's also is agile and can change its behavior based on new knowledge and new insights. And I
Yeah, I
think if you
love
can bring
that.
your organization to that level, I think you've hit exactly what you're talking about. And I think that's critical.
Yeah.
So once again, really enjoyed the conversation, Kit. As usual, I love talking about these topics, and hopefully our listenership enjoys them as well.
Great. And the thing I love is that I learn something new from you every time. So
Oh,
thank you for
likewise,
that.
likewise. Really enjoyed. Okay, well, thanks, Kit, and to our listeners out there, we will catch you next week. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.